Thanks for tuning into From Nothing, where we go deep on how healthcare founders actually went 0 to 1. I'm Patrick Haig, and today my co-host Ian Sefferman and I are joined by Dr. Ryan Grant, co-founder and CEO of Vori Health. Ryan is on a mission to re-humanize medicine, starting with musculoskeletal issues, and has raised $50 million from well-known investors like NEA, AlleyCorp, and Max Ventures to get it done. Today we talk about Ryan's path to Vory, the philosophy and the surprising stats that drive him, like how 40% of people who have surgeries for back pain simply don't get better, why he chose MSK as his wedge, how he transitioned from a practicing physician to running a startup, how he got his first customers through building champions, and more. When we hear about big visions, this is a big vision. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Ryan, thank you for joining us on From Nothing. We'd love to just get started by, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe give like the elevator pitch for Vori Health?
Yeah, of course, and thanks for having me. Neurosurgeon by training, was at Yale University, and then got recruited to Geisinger Medical Center. Was actually going to participate in the Centers of Excellence program, which is the Walmart Lowe's McKesson direct surgical contracting program before I left to do this full time. Built companies before this, co-founder of Nomad Health in the staffing space, and then was in medical device development for a while. And then before that, built another company. Actually walked away from practice in January to pursue this full time, and don't really view it as giving up on medicine. It's just an evolution of skill set, of knowledge accumulated, and wanting to make a different type of impact that can be much larger. And really the summary I like to think about is what makes you excited when you go home at the end of the night and spend your whole year on. And you help a lot of people as an individual physician, one-to-one, no question. But that doesn't scale to millions of people. And so I'm not looking to be famous with paparazzi and all that type of nonsense. It's like, want to be like, enjoy my life, but also want to be able to make a much larger impact on society. Like, for example, most people can't name the Nike co-founders. And a lot of people can't name CEOs or founders of iconic companies, but it doesn't mean that those institutions didn't impact society for a positive good. And so when I'm on my deathbed one day looking back, did the things you built stand the test of time and be able to really change society for the better is sort of what drove me to evolve my medical practice to do this type of work.
That's a pretty awesome kind of compelling motivator. And so what's the elevator pitch for what Vori Health is and does?
Yeah, Vory Health, we're starting in the musculoskeletal sector, which is back, neck, hip, knee. Don't plan to stay there forever. That's just our laser focus. A fellowship trained spine surgeon. And it's literally musculoskeletal. I would say overall is a bit of a free-for-all across the planet. This is not picking on any individual group. This is a systemic issue across the globe. Musculoskeletal is the top cause of global disability. Mental health is very close next to it as number two. We'll see if that flip-flops or stuff post-COVID. But there is a significant unnecessary surgery rate across the planet. Depending on who you read, the Centers of Excellence data suggests a 50% unnecessary spine surgery rate in this country. More conservative literature is 25%. Super conservative literature is 10, 15%. But still a lot of people, no matter how you slice and dice it, thousands of surgeries, regardless if it's a 10 to a 50% range, with most people hovering around 25 to 30%. When you look at all the data, that's a lot of people. So as we sit here and talk right now, on a conservative estimate, at least 1 in 4 people shouldn't be on the table. Joints is a bit better, but it's not that the surgeons are bad people. It's just there are multiple incentives, and one thing in terms of those statistics is if someone can get better on a non-operative program and also get better at surgery in an equal rate, is some people will push, we can get them better faster with surgery. Well, that's one argument, but what about all the risk? It's like how many people get hurt in surgery, how many people get infection. And so they're not quite equal when you weigh in the risk. It's like you can drive on the expressway, sunny, no rain, or you can drive on the expressway, snowstorm, and your headlights are out. You're both driving, but it's not the same risk profile. So it's not an equal comparison in my mind. On the non-operative side, most people violate the evidence. Not that they're bad people, they just don't know it. Imaging is used a bit like Instagram in this country. Society has this expectation, I need an x-ray, I need an MRI. And for most things, that's actually not true. It actually goes against all the evidence. Multiple countries agree upon it. And there's also this misconception that imaging should be pristine. And what I mean by that is even the way we label our radiology reports, oh, Kevin, you have abnormal imaging findings. It's like, well, if you got gray hair and wrinkles, which means you're usually over 30, we are likely to find some arthritis in any joint we scan, back, neck, hip, knee. And so just preparing people, I would actually be surprised if I don't find something. Just like if we walk around your house today, there's going to be micro cracks in the foundation. There's going to be some scratches on your car. It's all normal. Nobody really freaks out if they get gray hair. Well, to a degree, depends on how vain you are. But if you saw a 50-year-old with gray hair, you're not like, oh my God, it's so abnormal. It's like expected. And you see a 60-year-old with wrinkles, you're not like, oh my God, they have wrinkles. Like completely expected. But that's not how people take par on the imaging. You're like, oh my God, I have an L4-5 disc and I'm bone on bone. You're like, well, yeah, so are a lot of people. And so there is no good evidence that if you only have pain, not to minimize how uncomfortable somebody can be, that you really incur any permanent damage by living with it. So if someone's going paralyzed, that's a different story. That's very rare. If someone's losing neurological function, like their hand's not working, their foot's not working, that's a very different, that's just pain. Is most people will get better on a non-operative integrated program, 80, 85%, 15 to 20% of people won't meet their goals. But now they'll meet criteria to obtain an image. So it's Johnny, you didn't quite get to where you wanted for your back pain in a non-operative program. Next step for you, he only has pain, would be to obtain an MRI to look at your lower back. We are going to find arthritis changes probably at every level, given that you're 52. We would really use this as a map to look for potential surgical targets or injection targets or some other type of procedure to see if there's something more invasive we can do to help you. What do you think about that? And actually have a conversation with Johnny. And my experience, our experience, about 20% or so of people say, well, I'm not where I want to be, but I am not bad enough in my mind to even have an injection or a needle in me. So why do we scam those people? Because we don't talk to people that way. And it's just the way we've been trained across the planet. I was trained the same way. Is anybody listening to this, for both of you, think about the last time you saw a physician, a nurse practitioner, a PA, pick your clinician, who actually looked you in the eye and asked you what you thought about the care plan. Versus, Johnny, you need an MRI and you need to go do this. It's usually that route. It's usually very paternalistic. It's been like that for a long, long time. All the evidence-based guidelines, for the most part, across the planet, regardless of sector, are also paternalistic. We train our medical professionals to really think that way. So join an attending physician in the ICU, in the hospital, or on wards rounds. How do we talk to each other? That's a 52-year-old female with COVID. Next room, 42-year-old ruptured aneurysm. Next room, COPD exacerbation. What's their name? Go by initials. How are they emotionally dealing with this? What do they think about this? How's the family doing? It's really just a list of diseases with an age on it. And then when people say, well, how's the patient responding? All they mean is to a medical treatment, drugs, image, vital signs. It's not really the rest of the parts. And so medicine's really practiced in a relatively dehumanized way. And so all of that taken into account is really looking to re-humanize medicine, which means you have to think differently. It's a mindset. Really base things on patients' goals. So if it's just pain, is your pain bad enough to do something about it if you don't meet your goals on a non-operative platform? That's really your decision, heavy shared decision making. And really flip the conversation of, do the wrinkles in your face bother you enough to have a facelift? That's a very personal conversation, right? Do you have to have a facelift? Absolutely not. Is there a justification for it? Sure. It's quality of life. Makes you feel better, self-esteem, look younger. There's money benefits to that. But that not everybody's going to go down that route. Does your back pain, Johnny? You're someone who did not get to their quality of life that they wanted to from a non-operative side. Does it bother you bad enough to think about surgery? That's a very personal decision. Now, if someone's losing neurological function, foot's going weak, hands going weak, I do think you should, in those type of situations, be a bit more paternalistic. Is, well, if you were my brother or sister, really would try to preserve you from getting weaker and weaker, as we should really get a scan. We should really try to preserve neurological function. That's a very different conversation compared to just pain, which is really quality of life procedure. And so reorganizing all of that based on evidence-based medicine into care teams, follow all of those rules, you have to retrain people the way they think to remove the paternalism aspect and really have those conversations with people to drive down unnecessary surgery, unnecessary opiate utilization. Opiates, musculoskeletal pain is one of the big drivers of the opiate crisis in this country. It's not the only. Musculoskeletal is one of the most expensive parts in this country on the health plan. For a self-insured employer, 90% of the time, it is the most expensive component. The direct cost we spend is at least $300 billion with a B US dollars in this country. If you add in some mental health components and others, it quickly rises, and that's just this country. And virtual physical therapy or on-the-ground physical therapy, a movement-based specialty, is part of the solution to get people better. But that doesn't do anything with what about non-opiate evidence-based medications? Who's actually having the conversations about the paternalism aspect, which drives a lot of unnecessary care, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a place for surgery, absolutely. And when somebody does meet criteria for surgery, do they want it? If they don't have a neurological deficit, meaning going weak, should we really be pushing people down the surgical arm? Is that right? If that was your brother, sister, mom, dad, spouse, best friend, like, is that what we would really want for them? Taking a step back. And there's just misaligned incentives. Surgery generates a lot of money for both systems and large, and procedures make money, non-procedures don't. And that's how the current system's set up. And so as we shift from a fee-for-service world slowly to a true quality, value-based world where, well, what is the value I'm actually getting for my dollars? The patient getting better? They're getting healthier? And focus more and more on that. People getting rewarded for taking care of a population well compared to the volume of procedures they do, which tends to currently drive most financial incentives. So that's a lot of me talking.
So if I were to kind of make sure I'm understanding, it's really, I've heard you say this on other podcasts, rehumanizing medicine. So you're kind of rethinking the philosophy behind the treatment of humans, putting the patient very much at the center of that, involving them in their own care, engaging them in their own care to hopefully steer them to progressive layers of care that reduce the amount of unnecessary stuff. And you're starting with MSK because that's where like the dollar amount pain is. That's where the customer is in terms of the employers who have that very incentivized pain. But the vision is to expand throughout.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's just start over. If you had no rules besides the law, ethics, and treating people like true human beings, like family, what would you build?
Yep.
And then layer that with evidence-based medicine of what's the best science known. layer that with patient report outcomes, layer that with goals, patient goals. Like, well, what is important to Johnny? What's on his mind? Like, what's most important to him in his life? And is our medical care driving him towards the things that are most important to him? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to increase people's quality of life, right? Better health gives you better quality of life, gives you better length of life, less disease, less of dysfunction. So really, at the end of the day, it comes down to quality of life.
Yep.
And so it's all about quality of life. And the best person to answer the quality of life question is probably the person who's living that life.
Yep. So you mentioned it, you stopped practicing earlier this year, and on your LinkedIn, it says you kind of started Vory in July 2020. Can you tell us Vory's founding story from first spark? It sounds like this has kind of been like a long evolution and probably in your head, but from first spark to incorporation.
Yeah, if you go back to the seed investors about when first approached them on this, was many, many, many years ago. I was still a resident. About we need to do something about spine, back and neck. This was back when I was in training at Yale, and like you're like, as we do all these surgeries, like for back pain, you're like 40% of people aren't getting better, or they're not meeting their goals. You're like, and it's just continuously happening. There's a decent set of people who do get better. What about all these people who don't get better? And it's like, and still, when you look at the statistics for pure back pain, like it's not in the 90% range of people who get better. And so you do all these surgeries, the pictures look beautiful, the anatomy's better, but the patient's not. So obviously, all sorts of things that we don't understand about how people perceive pain, how much of this is being generated by the brain itself, and the perception of pain, how much of it is a mechanical thing about muscles and soft tissues, because we don't know how to really do much for the soft tissues. All spine surgery is based on bone, discs, and the muscles and all these soft tissues that wrap around it are really in the way to get to the spine. And so we don't really have great procedures, at least in the surgical realm, for the muscles. There's some experimental ones, but there's lots of unknown about what to do with the soft tissues and their play, but they're super important. And sometimes bear most of the forces in the spine compared to the bones themselves. And as you evolve over time, it's always, since I was a kid, always been really view entrepreneurship as a mindset of always frustrated when things are like, this is not efficient. This actually doesn't make any sense. Maybe it made sense when somebody set the system up 50 years ago, but right now it doesn't make any sense. And now feel in some circumstances that the process just owns people. They're just following a process to follow a process and have no idea why. And so the process is taken over, and certainly that process made sense when somebody wrote it, potentially, but process hasn't evolved and our understanding hasn't evolved, and built a different company before that. So actually did Nomad Health first, which is in the staffing space, and then returned to this type of work. Got interested in medical malpractice insurance at one point. Wrote a thesis on that, but started to find it to be boring. And so when I was like, do I want to spend the next 15 years on medical malpractice insurance? The eventual became no. And so actually tabled that and then returned to this. It's like, well, spent my life wanting to be in the medical field, trained in brain and spine, very interested in spine. Entrepreneurship, the system is literally out of control in my mind in terms of ways you can really make it better. And eventually had that passion enough to say, I want to work on it full time. And here we are.
So can you kind of walk through that in terms of like you started with first, like the system screwed up, the philosophy of medicine needs to change, the process that we follow today is just outdated and not really kept up to date. Your expertise is in brain and spine. So MSK makes sense. Did you always know you were going to start with MSK, or was that an evolution of like, that's my wedge into changing the system?
That's a great question. Could you start with other sectors? Sure, but in terms of like what I'm most passionate about and like what the world needs and ways you can really drive value, it's like expertise heavily in musculoskeletal, particularly spine. It's like worked in the surgical field, worked here, worked this, know the market pretty well. And so really it's like, how do you actually leverage your own expertise is makes the most sense. Like I would be a terrible expert in the oncology space. It's like, I don't practice that. It's like you could. And so all the nuances that exist in the musculoskeletal realm, um, much more firsthand experience of living that for several years compared to other sectors that don't know much about. And so in terms of my own experience in the field and just my core understanding and everything I trained in, this made the most sense to start in. And it's also a ginormous market and needs a lot of help. And so that plus this, and then one of my co-founders is a joint surgeon by training for orthopedics, and so those all together, it's musculoskeletal is really that laser focus.
And is it correct that you went full time earlier this year, or you went full time July 2020?
So it's when you start to make the transition of like, you know what, I'm going to transition out. So when we raised the seed fund, the plan was to transition out of neurosurgery to do this full time, and made a transition plan. So got to start winding your practice down. Right? It's like, what about you? So you can either just tell all the patients you schedule for surgery, bye, or you can just not accept new patients and wind your practice down. So in essence, clear out your practice and tell people, are they comfortable that you'll be leaving? Do they want to switch surgeons? Do they not want to switch surgeons? Like slowly, it's up to them. So call everybody, and then wind down over several months. So really, by the time you're in like Q4 of last year, you're not operating very much anymore because you're shutting your practice down, and then move into a full-time role where on the books you're full-time, even though before that, as a startup, you're working in essence more than full-time and burning the candle up with a blowtorch in the beginning, and then now have all that focus, and you don't have that distraction of another demanding job on top.
Yep, we get that game. Can you? I'm very curious what kind of work you did between July 2020 and going like full time after you wound down your practice. But maybe as a way to talk about that, a lot of MSK companies like Hinge and Sword are virtual first and seemingly virtual only, while focusing on MSK through the lens of PT nearly exclusively. But I think what you've highlighted is that you're very holistic in how you think about the issue and think about the patient. And I think you're virtual first, if I'm understanding correctly, but you're not necessarily virtual only, because I think you're hiring for in-person. Can you kind of describe your model of care and how you got there?
No, it's a great question. And virtual PT and e-consults and things that some of the other players in the space do certainly drives value. No question. And I truly do hope they all do well. The market's ginormous. The more people who do well, the faster society is likely to change mindset. If there's only one player in the space and that's it, then society is going to take less attention to it. It's like, how many computer manufacturers are there and cell phone manufacturers and streaming services? It's like, the more offerings you have in a sector, the more people pay attention to it and start to shift mindsets. So really do hope that a variety of offerings in the space grow, because it just changes the conversation and that just helps society better. And there's plenty of room for more than one group to live, given how big the market is, let alone this country, let alone in other countries in addition. And how many hospital systems are there, and primary care offices and dentists out there who are on a national scale or not on a national scale, or PT practices on a national scale. There's a lot of people to serve, hundreds of millions of people just in this country. And so I really wanted to tackle this from, given physician by training, from a very strong medical lens of we're a medical practice. So we practice medicine, so we can write prescriptions and write imaging and really do that shared decision making in addition to PT on the evidence-based side, compared to sometimes a standalone PT, which, yeah, it's like post-op, pre-op, non-op, just PT alone drives value. Some people only really need or would benefit from just PT. There's some people who need the full stack. Many people benefit from the full stack just because of the way medicine's organized and the amount of misinformation that's out there, and just people not educated in the space, like the imaging component. A lot of clinicians overuse imaging because they also don't know. Right? There's lots of misinformation of what does the evidence really say? So just because that's how you were trained, is there actually any evidence for that? Or is that the old, your mom's old tale that you can't walk and chew gum at the same time, something terrible will happen, or if you sit too close to the TV, you go blind, and like all these other things that just don't really have any evidence and not true. And so really focus on a medical practice, and would actually say that some of the other offerings, you could actually be synergistic with them. It's like don't have to necessarily be competitors per se, could actually be collaborative, and drive value together in a variety of different ways is how I really view the sector.
Yeah. I think that highlights and underscores your holistic approach, which is to say kind of the more the merrier, and we're happy to bring you in as long as you make the entirety much better. So kind of shifting focuses to like tactically getting this thing started. How did you get your first customer, whether that be the first patient or your first person who paid for your first patient?
Yeah, blood, sweat, and tears. I think entrepreneurship or just leadership, I think the difference in my mind between like a manager and like a leader is the ability to inspire other people. Is really what I would say is the main difference in my mind. And so, are you able to inspire, as you start a company, people to join your cause? Are you able to inspire investors to invest in that cause? Are you able to inspire your first set of customers to use your product? And then also sometimes identifying who those customers are. If you're in the D2C market, then you're trying to locate people and entice them on ads and search and content. And if you're not in the D2C space, then trying to entice either employers or payers or providers. And within all of those orgs, when you're early, first starting, is who are the champions, which sometimes can be the hardest part of that process to find. It's the people who would set up a tent outside the Apple store waiting for the new iPhone. That's not most people. Most people are like, I'm definitely not doing that. It's like, I'll wait. But there's some people who are so excited by new things and innovation in this particular sector. And those people tend to exist in most organizations. Sometimes the leadership doesn't even know who that person is, or sometimes don't know that person even exists. And so identifying who those champions are, we're like, we got to do this. We should do this. Can I help you? Can go a long way, so that you can really be a partner with everybody over time, but really be a true partner where you're helping each other redefine and do a better job where everybody wins. And so I don't think any part of building a business is easy. You need a great product and a great service, but that's only part of it. If you build it, doesn't mean they're coming.
Right.
It's really, how do you bring awareness to it and get people to change mindset of like what their current day is? Because the easiest thing for most people is to just do the same thing tomorrow that they did today. Same schedule, similar schedule, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And you're trying to be there saying, no, you should do also this, or change this course a little bit and consume part of their time to do X, Y, and Z. And so those first customers are always the most challenging. And then success begets success, right? The more partners you start partnering with who are happy or excited about you, doesn't make it easy, but it makes it easier to get more partners because they're no longer the first.
Right. So kind of thinking through that first and identifying those early champions, how did you? What was it? Network? Was it something else?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, even when I look at my other startup, your own network, who do you know really well in the sector who might be willing to help? And even if they're not willing to help, asking that individual, is there anyone in your network who you think would be willing to help? And then that next person, do you think there's anyone in your network who would be willing to help? And sometimes you find that sometimes the magic is actually 3 or 4 people removed from your primary network. Sometimes it is your primary network. And so it's a lot of relationship building, who's out there, going to conferences. I think networking has changed to a degree, but a lot of people now have Zoom fatigue, but people are more willing to do a video conference with you. So I think that some biz dev is easier today, but also would say some is harder because you're not bumping into people at a conference or talking to people at a dinner as you were during COVID. Some of that is starting to come back, but a lot of people talking about, well, I really want to be 50-50. I don't want to go to all these conferences anymore in person. And so it's sort of a change. And who do you call? Who do you not call? Most people don't call. People just send out emails and LinkedIn things. And so phone calls are rare. And what's the message you say to people? So well, if you're not the right person, would you be grateful if you would be willing to direct me to the right person? So it's a lot of time. It's like the most of your outgoing leads are not going to get answered. And the ones that do get answered don't always turn into partnership, but it's relationship building. You always learn something.
Yeah.
And you just keep building.
So did you go after employers for like when I hear relationship building and network of that degree, I hear employers typically because direct to consumer is a different toolkit. Is that fair to say?
Went providers first. So,
you went providers first. Okay.
Yeah. Providers first. I think there's certainly benefit in the self-insured employer space. But that's where most people play in all sorts of sectors. And, I think some employers certainly have fatigue from healthcare offerings. And so we will also do more and more things with the self-insured employer space, but didn't start there on purpose, given that's where almost everybody is.
Yeah. And I think networking is a really fun game. We've even gone so far as to plot our actual connection map in like a fundraise, and you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's many dots until you get the one. How many, if you were to think about this as like a conversion rate, how many calls or meetings or conversations did it take to get to that first champion who's like, oh, I get what you're trying to do. Yeah, I'll help you get actual patients?
I think if you have a solid message where it's like if you're writing an opus to people, no one's answering. No one cares. But if you have a solid message, you're calling people or networking with people, 10% will answer. Sometimes higher, but it's never 90%. Most outgoings are going to be silent. But then it's also targeting. And so there are the spray and pray where you're like trying to just cast a wide net on anybody, like at a conference, like who can I talk to, versus tactics to like, I want to directly talk to this individual at this org because, and I'm going to directly target them.
Yeah.
Or try to get them to talk to me. But even if they don't answer, I still want to talk to that person. What are other ways to try to get a conversation with the person? And so, who are the strategic folks that you should talk to, even if they're not responding? And what are other ways to not be annoying, but like actually have a real conversation with them where you're not just, you don't want to just consume their time and try to sell them something. It's like, or her, it's, well, if you're going to actually work together, what are their unmet needs so that they also benefit? If everybody's winning, that's a much better sale. Where it's like, well, why does it help him or her directly?
So you're clawing and scraping, and you're finding whatever way you can possibly get in to these providers initially. What were you selling them? Like what was the value prop at that point?
Depends on what type of provider you're talking to, and so and how they're paid. And so if it's an at-risk group practicing appropriate medicine to the finest degree with shared decision making, goes right to the bottom line. Right, those are your dollars. On a fee-for-service mechanism, it's also understanding what type of things do people not like taking care of that you could potentially offload because they don't want to deal with it. They hate it. They don't like it, whatever. It's like, how many people, sorry to all the chemistry folks out there, how many people really like organic chemistry? Not most people who would say it's like a required class to go to medical school. But if you survey most physicians, what are some of their least favorite classes looking back? Organic chemistry. But they were forced to take it. And so in their current job, in terms of unmet needs, what part of their job is stressful, a bottleneck, they don't like, annoying, whatever the word is? Everybody has that at their job. Like, what part of your day frustrates you? At your work on. People can certainly name them if they think about it. What makes you upset at work? Why? Like, why do you get upset? What makes you frustrated at work? And just go through those various scenarios of how well do you actually understand their unmet needs, and can you help them solve those problems?
Yep.
Can you make their day better?
And did you so then going back to whether they're sort of in the value-based care world or the fee-for-service world, like, was the vast majority of your early providers, were they on the value-based care side, or did you see a lot more traction from that side, or did you see equal amount of traction?
Mixed, because there is an incentive on a fee-for-service to see the patient because you get paid that way. And so even if someone doesn't like it, if it drives revenue down for them, they usually will still keep it. And so really it's that mixture of what do things not like, but then also how do you not drive down revenue for somebody? If anything, drive up revenue or save them money, right? Otherwise, most people on a capitalistic society or even a non-capitalistic society is if you hurt their dollars, that's usually a deal breaker. Yep. For most people. And so really it's how do you make their life better? What are their unmet needs? And then how do you either save them money, which is additional revenue, or how do you drive additional revenue to them, which is additional dollars? And so when it comes down to economics, are you saving them money somehow, or are you driving additional money to them? So that's sort of the binary type of, now that can be done in infinite type of ways. And so certainly a lot more economic alignments, no matter what sector you're in, if it's true value-based, because that the care and the economics are way more aligned than they are in fee-for-service.
So kind of taking maybe some of the pitches that you made to at risk where they shared up and down, what was the product at that point? Like what did you have built versus what you wanted to build? Like what kind of, can you define the scope of the early days of what you were offering?
Right. Well, if you're going to be a medical practice, then even your minimal viable product has to be able to practice medicine. So you have to have a system that can support a care team and that can do all the things that you said you're going to do and be able to do that from day one. Now you can get more and more sophisticated in tech capabilities of what the tech can do compared to a person, and X, Y, and Z. And when you're not working with providers to drive further engagement when they're on the asynchronous content side and on yada, 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 remote patient monitoring and nudges and behavioral changes, et cetera, et cetera. But from day one, if you're going to be a medical practice, you have to be a medical practice, which means when you launch, can you practice medicine with this amount of people to handle this amount of patients to serve your current customers? The answer has to be yes. And so that's really,
that was your V1.
That's V1, is can you practice medicine on a platform and care teams? Yes. And can you do it well? And continuously pushing on what does the tech do? How far can you take the tech? How far can you take engagement and behavioral change on top of that besides, and service design. So like medicine tends to not pay attention to service design really well at large. Startups do a lot better job, just medicine in general. Service design tends to be not thought about as often. And so it's like you take Peloton. It's like, did Peloton really build a better treadmill? Or did they build better content in a social community to engage you more so the home gym's less boring? And so it's really my opinion, their treadmill on their screen is really a portal into a content. And then, there's 30,000 people also potentially with you to make the home gym less boring and more engaging. And you're like, look, they gave me a gold badge or a silver badge and a little bit of gamification, because you can open your laptop up on a traditional treadmill and open YouTube and play a video. That's not Peloton. Right. Similar type of baseline infrastructure, right? It's not the same. And so really Peloton is a heavy service design play of much more engaging content and blended with the social community. It's not really the treadmill supplements that, but they're really a content company. They're really a media company who also happens to sell treadmills. Yeah.
So it sounds like your V1 was very heavy on we're a medical practice, so we have to have providers, we have to have physicians, we have to have a care team, but our MVP is an entirely different, or not entirely different, but a renewed service design when it comes to actually treating humans. I also imagine there's kind of like an MVP level of partnerships you have to launch with. And I noticed that you guys are direct pay, but you also work with insurers. One thing that we have always been trying to get smarter on is, what does it look like to start a relationship with an insurer? Can you shed any light into that?
It's like going to the DMV. Nice people work at the DMV, but there is a process. Most people who work for TSA are nice people too, but there's a process there's not much to say about that process except that it's a wonderful process, just like standing in line at TSA and going to the DMV. And so it's like go to a bank. It's like, what's the process to pull money out? At almost the same at every bank. And if there's only one teller, there's a long line and it's boring. And so, and those large, the larger the entity, the more challenging it is because it's a large bureaucracy. Most companies, when they get really big, are bureaucracies. And so things just move slower. It doesn't matter. It's like, by time it, like, you want to, even like Apple and all these other companies is like ginormous scale. How long does it take to do a new decision, particularly from an outside party asking? Well, how influential are you? What is the ask? And it's not going to turn over in a week or a month or 2 months. And so when you hear people talk about sales cycles, even in the employers, it's months, it's many months. It's a process. And so there's a process that goes through, and you can try to nudge it and try to change the world, but the system exists and you're trying to change the way the system operates. So it's going to push back because the whole systems are put in place to be efficient, right? Or they would put in place to sort of just run. And so there's always that, no matter, you find that in a startup too. The more organization you do, decreases innovation, right? But innovation brings chaos, right? Because you're experimenting. And so there's always this healthy tension, even in a startup, of innovation and organization so that you can scale and be efficient. But 100% organization all the time, well, if there's all these significant processes, how are you innovating all the time? And so you need guardrails, but you need a mixture of both. And people think about how you do that differently. It's like Walt Disney took his Imagineers and put them in a separate unit away from operations. Apple does it differently into functional agile systems. And so there's endless ways to think through it. There's no perfect way because we're human beings. And all of us procrastinate. Things that are really hard, do you look forward to doing them? It's like usually it's like you have to motivate yourself to, well, I have to do this tomorrow. I need to do this and I need to do this, and organize your own schedule. But think about the people on the other side. So this group wants us to do all these different things that we don't do. How interested are they to do that? Because in essence, in the beginning, you're asking them to do more work, right? Versus just leave their day from 8 to 6 p.m. or whatever it is. Go home. Go have a nice dinner with your family. So you're going to ask a group to do more work with you.
And is that what it was when working with, let's say, an insurer that you had to work through that process with? Did you get a lot of pushback because of your model?
It depends. It's like any org. It's trying to find those champions of who in the org likes what you're doing. That doesn't make it easy, but it certainly makes it easier because you at least philosophically have more alignment.
Yeah.
And so, and it's not just philosophically aligned. Do people want to spend the time helping you?
Yeah.
But like, what's in it for them? It's like, do you really need, are you going to go sleep outside the Apple store the next time the iPhone comes out? I know I'm not. But there are people who will, because that excited. And so who are those excited? Who are the people who are just as excited about your concept? Or who can you excite to at least a close degree, if you can, which I think you're looking to do. And they're going to strike out sometimes. If changing the world was easy, it would already be done.
We feel that. Maybe one more question, because we want to respect your time here, and we know we're coming up close to the end. So in 2015, you helped co-found Nomad Health, where you still sit on the board. What lessons did you take from that experience and apply specifically when starting Vori Health?
Yeah, no, that's a good question in terms of, I would say, strategy around fundraising and pitching and just the way you communicate with people. Like, what are the lessons learned? Can always get better at communicating with people, and always can do a better job of getting better and better at emotional intelligence of like, do you really understand how the person's receiving that message? Does their body language match what they're saying or not? And getting a lot better at listening. And what I mean by that is all of us, like, think about when you're in a meeting at work, or how often are you actually with 100% actually taking in what other individuals saying and processing it, versus like thinking about dinner and the project that's due tomorrow and somebody at home is upset, like those other thoughts that can come in. How often are you really actually listening to the individual? It's like when people go off screen, when they're on a group meeting, it's like when their face isn't there, and like, it's like, are they really paying attention? I don't really know, but you would guess definitely not fully. And so there are some things you can multitask on, but if you're in the middle of writing a paper in front of the TV, like, which one are you really paying attention to? Or is the TV just background noise? But you're not really focused on 100% on either one, if that's how you're working. And so if you want really true focus and to really take in concepts, it's really also talking to yourself about, you need to truly listen. You can always do better. I don't think any of us do that 100% of the time, even if you're like really, really good at it. But then getting better and better at communicating, receiving feedback, giving feedback. And I do think some of the hardest things of a startup is managing your own emotions. It's a roller coaster. This is working great. Oh God, this sucks. This isn't working. How do we problem solve through that? We're in the middle of a snowstorm and got to get through it. But it takes, I think mental effort is, particularly when you start a company, it's like you pouring your blood, sweat, soul into it. When things don't go as the way you're wanting them to, which always happens in a startup, things go slower, some things go faster. There's always hiccups because you're trying to change so many things. Is that notion that, well, if this sucks, do I suck? People tend to fall into that pretty quickly. But even if you're not building a company, it's in your own line of work. You're working on a project. You wrote this dissertation. You're working for a newspaper. You wrote this article that you think's a masterpiece, and the editor's not going to publish it. Didn't make the cut for whatever reason. Well, do I suck now? Like, that's where people tend to go. Like, I've been rejected for whatever reason by this work, or the market rejected this, or this happened, or this contract fell through. And people's temptation, those who are willing to be honest and cross-interview them, immediately sometimes fall into that rut of, well, I must suck. And so as you talk to lots of founders out there, and just early folks on teams, is people managing that there's going to be things that don't work, of course, always. There's things that don't work at Apple and Microsoft. They're ginormous companies. Like, oh, well, that didn't work. Try again. What do we learn from that? So it's really becomes a mindset of, things are not going to work. How do you problem solve for that and maintain the grit, perseverance, and the passion to keep climbing Mount Everest, even when the going gets tough?
Well, that is a great place to end. Ryan, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for all the insight.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I thought it was interesting to hear him say, first of all, like he immediately said the first customers were blood, sweat, and tears. And then when you started talking through what that looked like, it was, I will cold email. I will cold call. I will show up. I will show up at conferences. I will ask for an intro from somebody else. Like, I will literally do anything in my power to find those champions. And it was very clear, like, that was not we're going to send a template email to one person 10 times, and if they don't respond, they get marked off in our database.
It was a proper outbound process.
It was a very proper, a very guerrilla outbound process.
I enjoyed the amount of swimming upstream, where for startups, typically, that's super normal. Mm-hmm. But in this space, you get a lot of sideways glances.
Yep.
And I do wonder how many of those provider outreaches for customers were they like, wait, what are you doing? Yep. I don't understand that. That goes against everything that we've ever been taught. No, I'm not going to do that. And then, on the Insurer side I wanted to ask, can you actually, so we're going after insurers. Did you create like a stack ranked insurer list where you're like, this is most innovative to least innovative? easiest to navigate to hardest to navigate,
Yep.
longest process or shortest process to longest process. And how did you think through that? Or were you just like, everyone as a team, we're going to get in a bunch of DMV lines,
Yeah.
and whatever hits first hits first?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is a good question. And it's interesting because I think like I was looking at the Vori Health website and looking at their open roles. There's very little sales open roles.
Yeah.
It's almost all technology or medicine.
Clinical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
Did they find some great partners, or are they just still doing founder-led sales and that's it? Or and maybe this is kind of the point that I was going to talk about, but I think my head frequently goes to classic software startups where partnerships are hell, and partnerships don't work. It's really hard.
You'd rather go it your own and get your own customers.
Exactly.
It's usually better.
Exactly. But he was like, man, love me some partnerships. Want some more partnerships. Like, and like provider partnerships were his first channel. Then you have the Insurer partnerships. It's like none of that is going to actually find patients. It's finding people who can find patients for you.
Well, which we have learned is one component that elongates the 0 to 1 process for
it does
companies.
It does. It seems to elongate it, but it also seems almost required. I mean,
yeah, that's how you get at least patients. Or
yep.
That one, number one, I think it was why don't they have a sales team? I have a feeling if you can kind of nail your at-risk org pitch, you get a lot of, like, it's very one to many in terms of patients. And that spreads pretty quickly. Like he did hint at, well, you get your one early adopter, you do really, really, really well with them, and then that begets more success, more introductions. I would imagine with at-risk specifically, if it's like, we took these really hard to help MSK patients and we just plummeted that cost and increased those outcomes and patient satisfaction, that would spread pretty quickly around the at-risk world.
Yeah.
Even if it's small, and at least right now. So I have a feeling that might be it.
Yep.
But that's just me guessing.
Yep. The mission thing, by the way, is really fun because I loved his mission. I thought it was just so. It was cool to see. Like, it was cool to hear somebody say, like, no, like, burn it all down. Like, let's go do something better because it really matters. At the same time, as a patient who is non-medical, I was like really worried when he was talking. I was like, wait, but like, I don't know how to make the choice. Like, I rely on my doctor to say, like, this isn't an appropriate amount of pain that you should be in. Like, we should do surgery to get your quality of life up. It's like, I don't know. It's like,
I don't think he was taking that away. I think he was more of like, it's now the doctor's job to present the facts.
No, I know, but he
and ask based off of the doctor's also like adding to the conversation.
No,
so,
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. But like his whole, like, it's very paternalistic of the doctor to say what to do. I'm like, I kind of want my doctor to just tell me what to do. Like, that's what they've been trained for. I don't have the context that they have.
Yeah, but I'd rather have the system shift towards, like, it's called shared decision making, not like patient decision making.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather live in that because I'd rather not live and die by their decision making, which maybe they just be in a rut where it's just like, they're like, well, I put you in this bucket. Well, with these buckets, I always do this.
Which is certainly what they do.
Right. So you're in this bucket.
Yeah.
I said, but wait, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. There's some middle ground between, like, take away the paternalism entirely and give patients the opportunity to advocate for themselves, which I think also does not happen very well in the system.
Yeah. Like, I tend to be very probably obnoxious with how many questions I ask, but I have absolutely had a physician get pretty snappy at me for asking pretty basic questions about like my eyes, for example. And I was like, you better watch your tone a little bit. These are my fucking eyes.
Yeah.
But talk about the paternalistic stance sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'm all for moving towards shared decision making.
Yeah. But I really love his mission, like period.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's cool to see somebody.
Oh, the rethinking of I think like the care
Yep.
delivering philosophy is awesome.
Yep.
More Ryan Grants, please.
Right. Yep. Oh, here's something that I think is an interesting topic to talk through. He mentioned sort of the market and competition and how there's enough space for all of them. He hopes they do well.
Yeah.
Not only that, but also he thinks that they could even work together in certain ways. And
yeah,
it's really interesting to think about that because, I keep going back and forth on this. He's like, his analogy was like, how many streaming services are there? Or I can't remember what other computer manufacturers are there. And like in my head, I'm like, well, yeah, there were a lot, but like, it's kind of like down to like two.
Well, computer devices, that one started many, 2 to 3.
Right.
Streaming started out like 1 or 2. Now there's a shit ton.
There's a shit ton, but also consolidating really fast, right? Like there's really only a few that matter in terms of actual traction.
Yeah.
And I'm like those actually aren't very good examples, right? Like those are examples of industries that maybe it took a little while to consolidate. But
start out many, then they consolidate.
Right. Which is to say they were a winner-take-most market. And I think about this a lot in healthcare because I'm like, man, okay, yeah, MSK, fucking huge. Man, cardiology, massive, right? Like,
yeah,
there's a lot of different players that can do it, and we're probably in the first half of the first inning, right? It's like
you're going to baseball,
yeah,
straight to baseball.
Yeah, it's like you're super early. I was gonna go day one, but like I figured everybody.
You didn't want to drop Bezos in.
Everybody's tired of my Amazon stories, so like I'm like, okay, on one hand I actually fully agree with you. When we're thinking about businesses, I'm almost entirely blocking out the noise of who is already out in market and what have they raised. And I think he's another good example of this. I mean, Hinge and Sword have been around longer than he has and raised significant capital as well.
Yeah.
So it's like, put that noise aside because these markets are so large and they're definitely not won yet. But it does seem like they do converge to a winner-take-most market in the next 10, 15 years at some point.
Yeah, he's short-term right, long-term maybe not so right.
Right.
But in the meantime, you could still probably build a pretty massive business.
Right. Which is why
maybe it just doesn't matter.
I think it's probably the right thing to then say, like, never think about competition when it comes to healthcare. Like,
in fact, I would say, yes, think about competition and then just build over there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, always think about it as a validator, not as a
It's almost like in healthcare specifically, if there's not competition, what's going on?
Right.
Like, this might not be a place to play in. But if there is competition, you're like, great. As long as the market is big enough and it's young enough, let's go after it.
Yep. Which I think it's like every market is big enough and every market appears young enough as well.
Right. So, yeah, I'd agree with that.